You have some insight or an interest in a particular subject. You'd like to share that with other people. You have a means of recording your voice. Yes, today on Dragon's Teeth, we're going to look at setting up a podcast. Hi, I'm Rob Point, and thanks for joining me today in the second in our series on self-publishing. And as I said in the introduction, we're going to start with podcasts because I think that's the most accessible thing to get into. You can pretty much do it on a phone. I also mentioned that there's going to be some universal topics and principles across every aspect of self-publishing. And that's how we're going to start today. I am going to mention these when we come to look at print and video as well, because although they're universal, there are maybe some specifics that you need to think about as well for each area. The three subjects we're going to look at then are, if you want to start a podcast, why, how, and when. Let's begin. The very first question to ask yourself is, why do I want to do a podcast? There's a number of reasons for this. Of course, they're not mutually exclusive, and you may even find that your reasons change as you go along, as you get into the podcast, particularly as it develops. So let's think of some of the reasons that you might have. As I said at the start there, you might have an interest in a particular subject. That could be a fan interest in a certain type of fiction or film or genre. It might be that you have what we could call professional interest in certain subjects. You might be keen on history. There's a million and one things that you might be interested in, and you want to share that interest and enthusiasm with other people, which sort of brings us on to the next why, because a podcast is a great way of building up a community, of getting in touch with like-minded people, of networking even on different levels as well. So, it's a very social thing. Another reason may be that you have knowledge about a specific subject and you feel you're able to give people advice on that. That could be everything from mental health to physical health to relationships to financial matters and so on and so on. Now, I would just say, if you are going to go down that route, be aware of any legal implications, particularly if you're giving out things like medical advice, financial advice, and even fitness advice. Because I have to say, as a martial arts and fitness instructor, I sometimes see things on YouTube in particular that, they really make me wince. So be sure you are qualified in your subject, or at least state your experience. Never be tempted to sort of puff up your credentials or anything else. Always be honest with any qualifications you've got or any experience you have, and so on. Another reason might be that you want to entertain people. So that could be through music, it could be through spoken word, you might be telling jokes, it could be current affairs, you might be chatting about politics. I'm not sure how many people will find that entertaining at the moment, given that we're in the middle of an election campaign here in the UK. But, you're certain to generate talk, right, as soon as you start mentioning politics. So there's all those kind of areas as well, where people are not necessarily listening for information as such, but they're listening because they want to be entertained and they might even want to join in the conversation. I mentioned networking earlier on, so another good reason for getting involved in podcasts is for promotion. That might be to promote your business, it might be to promote your work in some way if you're creative, it could be to promote, well, maybe you want to promote certain ideas. I guess that's veering into politics again. But you want to get your information across, you want to actually connect with other people in order to, I hate this term, in order to boost your profile, as they say. And of course, podcasting can be a very good way to do that. If you start interviewing people, you start interacting with other podcast creators, other creators in your field, it's a very nice way of contacting people. And you will find over time, as your podcast develops, you will probably get invited to be on other podcasts and so on and so on. So it's a very nice way to get your name out there, if you like, and promote whatever it is you're doing. So when we set up the Innsmouth Book Club, my first podcast a few years back, it was for a mixture of those reasons, really. As I said, none of them are mutually exclusive. It really came about during lockdown. So, of course, we were all scratching around for something to do. I'd been listening to the H.P. Lovecraft literary podcast for quite some time, which always impressed me, and one or two others as well. And a couple of us thought, well, it might be interesting to have a go at that. Another strand of that, of course, was to help promote my own work, my writing, my editing and anthologies, my music, that kind of thing. And that idea of building up community as well, which I'm very pleased to say, at least in the weird fiction field, has been very positive. It's been 99.9% positive experiences. Everyone else has been very helpful, very friendly. I've been invited on other podcasts, other podcasters come onto our show, and so on and so on. So it's very mutually supportive. And in fact, I would say that's what led us to last year organising the first Innsmouth Literary Festival, where we managed to get a lot of those people together in one room and had a jolly good time. We had Ramsey Campbell as a guest, we had traders and all sorts of stuff going on. So good that we're doing it again this year in September, and our guest of honour this year is Mr. Charles Stross. So when you start one of these things, you never quite know where they're going to go. That was not something we really thought about when we first started, but that's how things can develop sometimes. So although you might set out with one particular set of aims, you have to sort of go with the flow a bit as well. Be prepared to change tack a little if you need to. And if something really isn't working, then don't be concerned about dropping it. You might want to do a 90-degree turn at some point. If it's not working, it's not working. And when I say not working, I'm not really talking financially, because it's very rare you're going to make a lot of money or any money off a podcast. If it's not working for you, if you're not happy in doing it, then be prepared to switch. How are you going to record your podcast? I'm going to go into more detail on gear, the sort of gear you need, or you might want to start with on a later episode. But you've got to think about some basic requirements to start. The first one is, do you have the time? And then from there, do you have the space to do it? Now, time will depend on the length of your podcast, of course. Ours usually run for anywhere between 50 minutes to about an hour and a half, which for me personally is an ideal. I tend to listen to podcasts when I'm driving. Generally, if I'm driving, I'm out and about for 40 minutes to an hour or so. So that kind of length is fine. Or I also listen when I'm out cycling, which again is going to be at least an hour. So that's how I digest my podcasts. But it could be that you want to do something shorter, maybe 5 or 10-minute podcasts. It could be that you want to do something even longer. I think the longest I've listened to has maybe been some of the Middle-earth podcasts, which can be a couple of hours, or some of the wargaming podcasts, such as Henry Hyde, for example, can be a couple of hours. And that's great. You've got a real nice long soak into the subject with that sort of time. So, of course, to do that, you have to have the time not only to record, but then you've got to think about editing and uploading and all the rest as well, which, of course, I'll be covering in the future. Alongside that, you're going to need a place to record as well. You really have to have as little background noise as possible. And I have heard podcasts or switched off podcasts when there's been so much background noise, it really interferes with your experience of listening to it. Now, that is not always easy. I live in the middle of the country. We've got fields front and back. You think it would be dead quiet. We've got one neighbour that side. We've got two neighbours that side. However, pretty much as soon as I press the record button on anything, especially if I'm filming outside, you can guarantee the lawnmower will start, the tractor will start over the back. We get planes from the nearby airfield doing acrobatics over the village for maybe 40 minutes or so. You wouldn't believe the amount of noise that can be generated in a rural place. And that's before we even start on our dogs. So try and find yourself a quiet place and a quiet time. One good thing to consider, which is that I'm actually doing at the moment, is I'm recording fairly late at night, and I'm in my little studio out the back. So I'm away from everything, and no one is mowing the lawn at this time of night. If they are, I'd be extremely concerned. Now, alongside that, you also have to think of the acoustics of the space that you're working in. If you're sitting in something like a bathroom, your voice is going to be bouncing around all over the place. It will sound like you're speaking in a tin can. So you want to be in a quiet place. You want soft things around you to absorb the sound, or you want to be in quite a small place. I mean, I know people, or I've heard of people who literally record in a cupboard, or you can actually get these voiceover booths that professional voiceover artists use. It is pretty much a cupboard. You stand in this thing and you're totally enclosed. Great for your voice, not so good if you've got claustrophobia. You've also got to think about how you're recording your podcast. Are you doing it on your own? Is it just you and the microphone? Are you hosting it with another person? Are they in the room with you? Are they somewhere else? Of course, these days, it's very easy to use Zoom and several other sort of programs or apps as well. So it's very simple to set those up. Again, that's something we'll go into a little more detail about later on. But you want to get that sorted from the start. If you're going to be interviewing people from your podcast or having them involved in some way, how are they physically going to be recorded? Again, is that going to be over Zoom? Are you going to go to see them? Are they going to come to see you? And so on and so on. So something else you need to consider as well. All right, let's get on to the final question for today. Before you even start your first recording, before you've even thought about the title or start writing out ideas for content, you need to have an idea of when you're going to do your podcast. How regular is it going to be? Now, at the start, you might think, oh, right, I'm going to put one of these out every day, you know? So, all right, maybe you can if it's fairly short and you've got the time to record, edit, produce, and upload. But you have to be aware when you start of the workload, right? You have to know what you're letting yourself in for. As a rough guide, when Tim and I record the Innsmouth Book Club, let's say we do 75 minutes would be an average. So that is probably getting on to 2 hours recording time, because of course we have a chat at the start, we talk about the things we're going to talk about, then we record the podcast, which might run for an hour and a half or so, then we'll have a little chat at the end. So it's very easy for that to go 2 hours. Following that, of course, it has to be edited. Now, the thing is with our type of podcast anyway, is I need to listen to it to edit it. It's a specialized subject. I don't think it can be done by AI, or I even wouldn't trust it to another editor, to be honest. But then that's just me, you know. That's my OCD kicking in to play. Unless a person really knows the subject, how would they know maybe to cut that bit out or not? Some things are obvious with your editing, of course. Someone says something wrong, or there's a big gap, someone coughs. Again, of course, that's something we'll be looking at as we go through. But when it comes to information, it has to be someone involved with the podcast who is doing the editing. How long that takes is difficult to say generally, because some episodes, you know, if we're really in the flow, we go through bang, 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 we make all our points. Neither of us fluffs any of our lines. We get all the pronunciations right. Another day it could be that one of us drops our notes all over the floor, or more usually the postman turns up, the dog starts barking, you know, all this sort of stuff goes on as well. So you've got to think, if a podcast is an hour long, that's going to take at least 2 hours to edit, because you've got to listen to the whole hour for one thing, and then you're going to be cutting bits out and making adjustments here and there. So whatever the length of your podcast is, I'd allow at least double the time for your editing. That means, of course, if you're going to do a podcast every day, then, let's say you're doing a 10-minute podcast, you're probably going to spend 20 to 30 minutes recording it, and you're going to spend about an hour editing. So, you're already into an hour and a half, 2 hours, just to do something you think might be quite short. Don't overload yourself. The other thing you have to think of as well with frequency is, weekly is fine. We do fortnightly with our 2 podcasts, but we're doing 2. So effectively, we're producing a podcast every week, Innsmouth Book Club one week, and then Strange Shadows the next. So that is quite a commitment. Wednesday afternoon is recording time. Thursday afternoon is editing time. Then there's other bits and pieces as well. We've got to go into promotion and all that sort of thing. But that now is part of our routine. So if you are going to do it and do it seriously, that's what you have to lock yourself into, that sort of commitment. There's nothing worse, and I have this with some podcasts that I really do enjoy listening to, but they might bring one out every 6 weeks, then there might be one 3 weeks later, then nothing for a couple of months. I understand it, people are busy and everything else, but I do find that frustrating as a listener. If it's a good podcast, I understand every week is difficult, but I think it's more regularity. Doesn't matter if it's every 2 months, if I know it's going to be every 2 months. So you need to think about the amount of work that the podcast is going to be, and you need to be careful that you're not getting onto a bit of a treadmill with this as well. At the moment, I'm doing a podcast every week, as I already mentioned. I also have a martial arts YouTube channel where I do a monthly vlog, and I'm also uploading other little bits and pieces now and again. I also on that have a member channel, which I upload weekly lessons to. I have my Simply Float Health and Fitness channel for my members, which generally something goes out on there maybe once a fortnight or so. And as well as that, I now have this channel as well, Dragon's Teeth YouTube channel, where again I'm trying to put uploads out consistently. They're not particularly regular in terms of every 3 or 4 days or whatever, but I try and put something out at least once a week. You combine all those together, and that is a fair amount of work. As I said, by the time you get your shooting, your editing, your artwork, your promotion and everything else, that is enough to keep anyone busy. You have to be careful in that case that you don't get into this sort of creator burnout thing where you feel obligated to be churning stuff out non-stop, endlessly. So you don't want to get on that sort of hamster wheel, where you just keep going and going. As I said before, in terms of financial reward, that's probably the worst reason to get into podcasting, unless you've got some amazing insight, right? There could be something fantastic you've got. That's something else you have to think about as well with your subject. Are you going to go mainstream and really broad, in which case you're up against a lot of competition? Let's say you're going to do a fitness podcast, right? There's tons of them. On YouTube channels, there's tons of them. As podcasts, there's tons of people talking about fitness. Your other option is to find a very niche subject and go for that. So you won't have as wide an audience base, but the people who are interested in that subject are going to flock to it. So, we could take the example of our own podcast, the Innsmouth Book Club, weird fiction, horror films, ghosts, M.R. James, Lovecraft, so on and so on and so on. Quite a wide base. Strange Shadows, Clark Ashton Smith, even amongst weird fiction fans, not necessarily a very well-known author, but the people who like him really like him. So we've found, in terms of numbers, we've got the same audience for Clark Ashton Smith as we have for the way more popular, the way more well-known Lovecraft. Because there's no other Clark Ashton Smith podcast around, I think we're the only kids on the block at the moment, we're attracting interest from those real sort of hardcore fans. So that's something to consider as well. Are you going to go broad? Are you going to go mainstream? You're going to go for the big topics? Or are you going to hone in and find your own particular little niche? There's a few thoughts then to get us started. I don't want to put anyone off, but at the same time, I want to make people aware of what's involved when you start something like this, if you're really going to go for it. And I would always encourage people to go for it, whatever it is, any sort of creative endeavor. I think now, speaking as a musician particularly, there are way less opportunities than there were when I was first getting into music, age 17, 18, 19 or whatever, all those years ago. There are far less opportunities now in terms of playing live and getting record deals and all that sort of stuff. It was tough back then, but at least you had a chance. We had talks with EMI and that kind of thing at one time. We felt we were in with a chance. Nowadays, well, do record companies even sign people anymore? I think we're getting to the stage, I've even seen it, where people are putting out AI albums, right? They'll take a particular genre, let's say rhythm and blues, and they'll make up an artist and AI does the whole album. That's where we're at these days. So if you are a creative person, the opportunities are getting less and less. However, that same technology also gives us access, I mentioned Zoom before, to things like podcasts. We can record our own music at home now. So, look on that side of it as well. It's, I suppose, a double-edged sword, right? Any sort of technology is. But if you can learn to take advantage of it to get your message out there, be it written word, video, spoken, whatever it is, music, then I'd say go for it. But do be aware of some of those things I've pointed out. And of course, I'm sure there are things I've missed there as well. So if you do have any comments, any other suggestions for people, please do send them in below. If you do have any questions, then pop me a message below as well, and I'll do my best to answer. All right, that's the first in our podcast series. Thanks for watching, and I hope you can join me next time when I'll be taking a look at what sort of gear you need to get started.